Good evening and welcome to another edition of This Week in 60 Minutes. I'm your host, Roodi Balgobin. Before we get any further, I'd just like to apologize for the absence last week. But as you know, the Chief Justice was making her ruling in the Christopher Ram matter challenging the House-to-House, the constitutionality of the House-to-House ongoing registration. So as a result of that, we were not here last week. But nevertheless, we're here this week and we'll be here for the unforeseen future.
Okay, I'm your co-host, Juan Edghill Jr. I would like to say thank you to you, our viewers, as well as those joining us via our Facebook live stream this evening. Good night to all of you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nalini, and the focus this week will be the implications of recent developments at GCOM.
Yes, I'm sure the entire nation is awaiting what they would have known that there was a meeting today of the commission, and indeed there was such a meeting. At 1 o'clock today the commission met, and that meeting went on for approximately 3 hours. Now, there were several developments. As many of you would have been aware already, the commission had asked the Secretariat, Mr. Lowenfield, to present certain scenarios in which elections can be held. That was done today. However, we are not sure as to what those timelines are, but we are aware that those scenarios were presented. And to date, we have to report that there has been no decision of the commission. However, they will be meeting on Friday at 1 p.m. again to go through this process where they're looking at the shortest possible time that the elections can be held. The reason being for this, and I'm sure the entire nation is aware of this by now, is the passage of the valid no confidence motion, which was deemed passed by the Caribbean Court of Justice on the 21st of December 2018. And we should have had an elections by the 21st of March 2019. However, we have not had such an elections. You guys are aware of the constant court battles, the back and forth, GCOM starting the ongoing house-to-house process. And the challenge to that, there was a ruling recently, just last week, Wednesday, and the Chief Justice made her ruling in this case, and where she alluded to what the no confidence motion would say.
So I should probably read just a bit of this is part 178, and I'll quote directly from the decision. It says, I quote, "Thus, whatever verification or revision exercise is undertaken to ensure a fair and credible election, whether house-to-house or otherwise, for the preparation of the list of electors for national and regional elections, consequent on the NCM, must be conducted in the context of the order of the CCJ of July 12, 2019, and that the provisions of Article 106 immediately became engaged on the passage of the NCM on December 21, 2018. This means that elections should have been held on March 21, 2019. That is within 3 months of the passage of the NCM, or such extended date as approved by 2/3 of all the members of the National Assembly," unquote. And that is exactly from the decision here.
Exactly. Well, we all know what is the rationale behind her ruling this, is that, and she mentioned this in court as well as she was giving her judgment, that there cannot be any pause of the provisions of the Constitution, and as a result, we didn't have an elections March 24th. Instead, the challenges in court went on, the CCJ gave their decision, and importantly, there was no extension by the Parliament to date. And the opposition leader has constantly said that there will be no such extension from the People's Progressive Party, and basically they need the support of the People's Progressive Party to get the 2/3 majority vote.
Absolutely.
They've been going on with this house-to-house exercise. So what's happening is GCOM staff have been misleading people on what the Chief Justice ruling says in relation to re-registration.
Yes, indeed.
So we're going to just read to you now some of what the Chief Justice said. There are no laws setting out any additional requirements, more particularly residency, in relation to a person qualifying to be registered to vote.
Yes.
Thus, there are no laws requiring a prerequisite for registration, and thereby the right to vote, the presence of a person during house to house once they've already been registered previously. So, you don't need to register again if you were already registered. Then another part of her ruling says, by stipulating that a person who had already been registered must be at their residence at the time of house-to-house registration in order to be registered, suggests another qualifying criteria is being added for registration as an elector. A reading of all relevant provisions leads to the inevitable and conclusion that GCOM does not have discretion without more to remove the name of a person from the list of registrants or electors because such a person who was previously registered has not re-registered during the house-to-house registration exercise. So GCOM cannot just remove you because you're not there. And
Very
then
important aspects of her ruling there, because as we know, that was the main focus of the commission.
And lots of people were very concerned about that.
Yeah, one of the words that is key here is the word re-register.
Yes, exactly.
Why would you re-register if you're already registered? Why do a process 2 times when it has already been conducted?
It seems like a waste of resources. So one of the final parts I want to highlight from her ruling was GCOM.
Before you go on, you would have read for those that are following Articles 139 and 141.
From her judgment. Yes. And then this is 161. If you have a copy of her written judgment, you can have a look at what we saw talking about. GCOM would have no legal authority to remove or deregister such a person who otherwise qualified unless such registration can be cancelled, pursuant to Sections 8 and Sections 15 claims and objections of the National Registration Act and the regulations thereto as outlined above. These persons may return to their districts to vote, but their names cannot ipso facto be removed from the register of registrants, which removal would then disqualify them and deprive them from their right to vote. To do so would be unconstitutional and therefore illegal. In regards to this, paragraph 67 and 69 of the COCR affidavit correctly captures how the list is to be revised when he says in 67, during the process of revision of names of persons are added who may become qualified, of persons who registered electors are deleted who cease to be qualified to be registered. And 69, the removal from the elector registrant or roll has been provided for in the Elections Law Amendment Act number 15 of 2000. So what happens there is you cannot be forced to be registered if you're already registered. During this period, anyone 14 that they're saying can go and register. And then the whole house-to-house thing is kind of like
basically it's just a waste of money and
time also. Waste of time also.
And as the leader of the opposition has constantly pointed out, just last week in fact he pointed out that it's a colossal waste of time and resources, and it's nothing more than a delay tactic by the government to remain illegally in office and delay the elections and frustrate the democratic process.
We already have processes in place that replace the house-to-house completely.
Yes,
we did. For example, continuous registration. We know that the process we would have spent millions, billions of dollars building head offices and centers and GCOM centers all around the country to ensure that we have provisions in place for continuous registration to continue.
Every 6 months.
So now we are replacing all of that with a new process that is redundant, that is a waste of time. I mean, what exactly is the purpose of this exercise if it really cannot really bring us any closer to elections?
Not funny actually, but scary, is that the GCOM staff, some of them are, when they're out there doing this house-to-house exercise, they're threatening Guyanese, particularly the persons in low-income areas, with going to jail or fining them $16,000 if they don't register because they say the Chief Justice has said this. And I've just read to you what the Chief Justice has written. This is her written judgment. And they're lying about what she says. They're misrepresenting the facts. And they're bullying people essentially with this.
I think it's very important, and after the program we'll make available a copy of the Chief Justice's written judgment on our page this week in 60 minutes. So anyone who wants to go there and get a copy of it and read for yourselves, we have read a few sections from her judgment thus far. You can go there and read for yourself and see exactly what she said from the beginning to the end. and don't fall prey to some of these GCOM staff that are threatening persons to re-register.
Telling people that they won't be able to vote and all these things if they don't register. When Guyana signed on to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which guarantees your right to vote. You have an international human right. I think it's Article 26 in the UN Declaration of Human Rights that you have the right to vote. And
just recently, the Caribbean Court of Justice went through a case where a person in Barbados would not have been able to vote at the election. And they concluded the hearing, made their orders and declaration over the weekend. Just so that that person can go to the poll, because the world recognizes that now these are enshrined in human rights laws throughout the country.
Right. It's a fundamental right. And the Chief Justice in our ruling has upheld that right of citizens. That once they're registered to vote, they don't have to be here, but once they've registered to vote, once they register to vote already, they don't have to go and get re-registered now.
Definitely.
So students who are overseas, and this is very important, students who are overseas studying, and those who are in other countries working, they can come back and they can exercise their right, their democratic right, and vote in these elections that are upcoming. And this is what the party was fighting for. This is the baseline of what the party was fighting for. Ensuring that once you're a Guyanese and you're eligible to vote, you do not lose that right. And GCOM doesn't have the right to do it.
Contrary to what the coalition government has been.
Create a new national database.
And what you point out there was very important to mention, because it seems that everyone has been, the government propagandist has been spinning and telling a lot of lies that the opposition, the PPP, only don't want house to house because we don't want young people to vote. On the contrary, what we have been fighting for is for persons not to be deregistered and not being able to vote.
And not scrapping the old database.
Exactly.
It was that 10 years of information you want to destroy?
Over 10 continuous registration cycles. It's been built, it's been tested with several general elections, several local government elections, no complaints from no serious complaints from any of the political parties that form the coalition. And now that there has been a no confidence motion passed and the provisions of Article 106 is clear and elections within 3 months, suddenly this database is flawed, it's bloated, and all these things. So the House is nothing more than a ploy to delay the elections, and any right-thinking Guyanese can see through this veneer.
Yes,
that is just a ploy.
Definitely.
So go through.
So we do need to encourage our fellow Guyanese out there that not to be bullied on the road and not to allow anyone to threaten them and to tell them that they need to do X, Y, and Z. They need to know their rights.
Yeah, you just say you're misrepresenting the chief. You're lying about what the Chief Justice has said. Because that's not what she said.
Yes, basically. So once you're registered to vote, just ensure you're on the list. And you're going to be okay, because you cannot be removed from the list now.
Exactly.
And you will be allowed to vote. I have to reiterate that you will be allowed to vote to the next elections.
Definitely. Yes. And that's not to say that you will go and fight with the GCOM staffers or chase them down the road or anything like that. We
just be very polite.
Very politely tell ma'am or sir, I'm already registered in accordance with the ruling of the Chief Justice. It's not necessary for me to re-register.
If they become hostile, just close your doors, go back in your house.
Exactly. Do not engage in any form or in any way. Now, I'd like to move on briefly on the impact of GCOM decision on the way forward. We started off the program by saying that GCOM is yet to make a decision on the elections and when we can have any elections. Now, I'll just like to briefly go over paragraphs 178 of the ruling from the Chief Justice, which one would have read earlier, to highlight my point. Thus, whatever verification or revision exercises undertaken to ensure a fair and credible election, whether house to house or otherwise, for the preparation of the list of electors for the national and regional elections consequent on the no confidence motion, must be conducted in context of the order of the CCJ of July 12, 2019, that the provisions of Article 106 immediately became engaged on the passage of the no confidence motion on December 21st, 2018. This means that the election should have been held on March 21st, 2019, that is within 3 months of the passage of the no confidence motion, or such extended date as approved by 2/3 of all the members of the National Assembly. Now, I went over that paragraph to explain that the election's date is very important, and as the Chief Justice alluded to in her written judgment, that GCOM must realize that since March 21st, 2019, we should have had an election.
So we technically have an illegal government since.
Yes, in essence, we have an illegal government in office.
Caretaker. We shouldn't say illegal.
Caretaker,
Yes.
illegal, practically the same thing. But what I'm getting at is that GCOM needs to realize, and this impacts the entire nation. That's why I'm dealing with the impact of GCOM and their decision. They need to make a decision as soon as possible. They met the previous week and they said that they will meet on Wednesday, which they did meet today, and the reason for doing so is because they didn't have the written judgment of the Chief Justice. I was informed that they got that judgment yesterday. They would have had time, everyone, to study it, more particularly the chairperson of GCOM, and to see exactly what the Chief Justice was saying.
To understand her orders and everything. Yeah.
Thus far, well, as I said earlier, they're going to meet again on Friday, and hopefully we can have a decision being made as to a date for elections within the shortest possible time, which is very, very important.
What would it be to be a fly on the wall in that meeting?
You know, what's the main thing, or what's the most important thing, is that we get an elections date. Yeah. I mean, GCOM has now been presented with its work programs, and GCOM has to do its work and assess all the different things. But it is important that GCOM remembers that it's not business as usual, or we're not in a normal setting right now.
As the Chief Justice said.
As the Chief Justice would have said in her ruling.
And in fact, I'd just like to read that briefly, what she said, for the edification of everyone there. Sure. And this is what the Chief Justice said in her written judgment at paragraphs 114. As such, since GCOM is seeking to register electors, GCOM may have to consider other options, including what other methods of verification of the list may have to be utilized, whether in conjunction with or separately from the house-to-house exercise. Indeed, the Chief Elections Officer deposed that the preparation of the official list of electors permits the registration of every qualified electors during the registration cycle or a claims and objection period. While pursuant to Articles 160 and 162, GCOM is an independent body that is not subject to the control or direction of any person or authority, and while it is incumbent on GCOM to produce a credible list and a credible elections, it is subject to the Constitution and the laws and cannot act as though it is a normal registration or elections cycle. Now, that is very important, in my view, very, very important. While GCOM is an independent body, they cannot take direction or should not be taking directions from anyone. They ought to recognize that this is not a normal circumstances.
No,
I recall at the hearing at the Caribbean Court of Justice, Justice Sanders, the president of the Caribbean Court of Justice, repeatedly explaining to Mr. Marcos, the lawyer representing GCOM, that GCOM needs to understand that something extraordinary has happened. And no confidence motion was brought to the National Assembly, and they subsequently ruled that it was validly passed. And they said that Articles 106 immediately became activated, and Article 106 7 says that you must have an elections within 3 months unless extended, and we know for a fact that
it hasn't been extended.
No extension.
What I find interesting though is no confidence motion is a common thing in any parliamentary system, a way to keep governments in check. So it was one of my first years in university in Canada. Stephen Harper, his government faced a no confidence motion. Actually, they paroled Parliament twice. Their motion was passed March 25th, and they had elections May 2nd the same year. That was in 5 weeks. Britain, where we get our constitution from, they had their last successful no confidence was brought by Margaret Thatcher on the 28th of March 1979, and elections were held May 3rd 1979, and that motion passed by the one vote, just like ours, 311 and 310. That was the vote there. And what was interesting last year was a great year for no confidence, apparently, because at the start of the year you had the Greek government falling to no confidence on the 16th. That motion failed. The Greek government didn't. They faced one, and they did, and theirs failed. Then in Sri Lanka, November 14th, a no confidence passed there. 2 weeks after, they had elections the 5th of January. That was in 2 months. They had
2 months.
2 months. That government was only there for 3 weeks before it faced a no confidence.
Wow.
And then Spain, a motion was brought on the 25th of May, debated the 31st, and then between the 31st and the 1st, it was debated. The government resigned after it passed on the 5th of June. Spain has a different system, but the government faced the consequences a few days later. Abided by their constitution.
And the rule of law.
Yeah.
Yes.
Italy and Indonesia, those are countries that faced recent no confidence. It's interesting, the Guyana is the only country to have had a successful no confidence motion that has not been successful.
That is a very interesting point indeed.
If you would recall, guys, in 2014, I know you give a lot of examples, regional and international examples, but if you would recall in 2014, the AFC, they had threatened to a motion of no confidence, but however, it was never tabled in Parliament. It was never debated, and it was never passed.
Yeah.
That is very important.
That's
very
a
important
good
point.
point. Yeah.
It was never passed.
It never even got to Parliament.
Exactly.
It was just a talk.
Now, at that time, what President Ramatar did, he prorogued the Parliament, which is a constitutional provision given to him by the Constitution.
Here's what happened. He did twice to skip his own.
Right, in line with the Constitution, and to move to general and regional elections. Now, in 2015, Parliament was dissolved on February 28, 2019, and general and regional elections were held 71 days after. If you recall, the elections in 2015 happened on May 11th, 2015. So that is 153 days. It's now 153 days in our present, I would say, situation. Since the no confidence motion has been passed, it's now been 153 days since elections should have been held, which is from March. And it's now been 243 days. I have to repeat that, 243 days since the no confidence motion was passed in the National Assembly.
What I would like to point out, though, is what Article 61 of our Constitution says is an election of members of the National Assembly under Article 62 shall be held on such a day within 3 months after every dissolution of Parliament, as the President shall appoint by proclamation. So this is not like the 3 months thing is not specific or unique to the no confidence motion.
Yeah.
It is required for all the motions that I remember we were talking about.
In fact, let me point out here that it's not just the parliamentarians sat there without consultation or anything, and like, oh, you know what? We think we should have a no confidence motion. Then 3 months should be enough.
Or any election.
Or any election for that. The date of 3 months came about with wide consultation with GCOM and GCOM's technical staff. And they were the ones that provided the 3 months time frame within which they could be ready for an election. Yeah. You just heard Juan mention that after the prorogation of Parliament in 2014, then President Donald Ramatar, within 71 days, GCOM was able to hold an election. Now, it's fundamental to ask what is different now.
243 days.
Yeah, as one mentioned, it's been 243 days.
I'll tell you what's different now, Roodi. The difference between 2015 and 2019 is the difference in government. You had a PPP government in 2015 that respected the Constitution. They abided by the law. They were prepared to head to the polls. They were confident. They were prepared to head to the polls. They followed through. And President Ramatar, and I've said it on this program before, he came under a lot of criticism. But the government, they did something that was provided for in the Constitution.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right, and they stuck it through, and they went through the process. And as you said, 71 days we had the election, and it was done. Exactly. The same year.
But the difference is this president is a military person, very dictator-like, actually.
Well, And this government, they refuse, and you know, they've been saying one thing, somebody else saying something else. You know, they're just refusing to abide by the Constitution. We spoke on the last program about the president not run away from his responsibility.
Definitely.
Right? Not run away from his responsibility. So I want the Guyanese public to realize that there's a difference in government, there's a difference in style, there's a difference with regards to respect for the law and order of our country.
They say it, but they don't do it.
And that is why there's a difference.
That is a very important point to point out, and I'm sure we'll get to the PPP and how different we are a bit later on as we discuss a few other things in the program. But let me just briefly go back to the claims and objections, which the Chief Justice herself alluded to, that there are other options, including claims and objections. And I'm sure everyone would recall that in the corridors of the High Court, while the challenge was ongoing, when questioned by the press, it was Mr. Lowenfield himself who said that, yes, the list can be ready with just a claims and objection, a period of claims and objections, and that is not necessary for House. Yes. Additionally, I'd like to also point out that there were legal opinions from the legal officer of GCOM who also pointed out that the house-to-house registration is not necessary. It will be in contravention of the ruling and in contravention of
it would not facilitate
the no confidence
motion, and that is the primary thing at this moment. But I do want to say that GCOM has said that the claims and objection exercise will allow the following. We've been reading it before. I do want to point this out.
Definitely.
It will allow any eligible Guyanese citizen who has reached the age of 18 years old to be registered if their name is not on the voters list. Allow any eligible Guyanese to get a transfer from one voting district to another in the event that they change their place of residence. It will allow any eligible Guyanese citizen to do a name change. It will allow for the removal of a dead person from the voters list. And it will allow for objections to be made to the name of someone not eligible to be on the voters list. And once again, this is
I
the
just
position
want to point out, though,
here.
for the removal of a dead person, you have to provide a death certificate.
Yes, of course. And but the point is that during this exercise, or during this period of claims and objection, all of these provisions or all these exercises can be conducted. So they're really and truly, I want to make the case again, house registration is completely unnecessary. It's a complete waste of time and resources and money. The country right now, we should have had elections by March 21, 2019. And you know, we need to have elections right now.
We could use that money to firm up the staff for election day.
Exactly.
Pay polling agents.
Also, additional to what Juan just mentioned, let me just say that the claims and objection is a tested method, as I've explained earlier. It worked for several general elections, the same list, same process. Continuous registration, we've had over 10 cycles since the creation of the National Register of Registrants, which is the current database.
That was 2008.
2008. It does not expire. It does not just vanishes. There's no need to scrap it and recreate one. It's always constant. It's always updated via continuous registration. And whenever there's an election period in a normal election cycle, they would extract the preliminary list, you would do a claims and objections, and you would have an official list of electors.
They can do that now too?
Everyone agreed with this up until 2018, when a no confidence motion was passed. Then suddenly it was confusion all over.
Until the no confidence motion was successfully passed, when the court said it was, then we had this house-to-house start.
And that resonated with me, what you said. Guyana is the only country where a no confidence motion was successfully passed in 2019.
2018.
In 2018, well, we're in 2019, and we can't have an elections, which is says a lot for democracy in Guyana. More importantly, let me just highlight what the UNDP position is. Everyone is aware that the United Nations would have lent their support to GCOM and came down. And this is what it said. The report of the United Nations Electoral Needs Assessment Mission, May 7 to 11, 2018, which made clear that the voters list will not have more credibility. The report said, it is the view that there is no certainty that a new voters list will have more credibility than the current list, and that stakeholders will trust it more. Furthermore, any list created close to elections will likely be criticized as politically motivated. And that is exactly what we've been arguing over and over, that in prior to the passage of the no confidence motion, everyone understood what the processes were to have an official list of electors and how to get to that without, going and spend all this money on house registration. And the UN recognizes that if you go to a house now, scrap the existing National Register of Registrants, it is grounds for vitiation of an election, regardless of who wins.
Yes,
because you basically rush it through.
The loser will say, look, you cheated somehow.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, and it goes back to a lot of different things, I would say. But why exactly do we need elections now? Why is it relevant for us to head to this election? I know you were saying before that our past, we have a very iffy past in Ghana, where we really should be building up our trust and our appreciation for each other. But now with all of these things that are happening, one government not respecting the constitution, it really makes the Guyanese people a bit uneasy or uncertain about the trust going forward of a government.
And of course, we've heard from our foreparents that this is not the first time
before
it's happened in our
history. We didn't have free and
Yes.
fair elections. We've always fought for a democracy.
Yes, we did.
We got it between 1990 to 92.
Yes,
We had
we
the
did.
whole
Yes, we did.
period where you had to have all the struggle. And now it seems like we're going back to the 70s,
we're just
80s.
regressing backward.
Where we need these big protests to come out like 5,000 people.
Yeah, actually, I was on Charlotte Street and a man was telling me, Sonny boy, you're a little too young to understand what we went through before '92 in this country. And I said to him, I would have read the history books and I saw the videos and all the rest of it. But he said to me, no, you really don't understand
The
what we went
first-hand
through.
experience.
there,
of
You
yeah.
understand. So, but now we're just having a basically
Tip of the iceberg, as
that's
you would
right.
say. Yeah.
And it's really bad right
Yeah.
now. And we're so fed up. And Guyanese people have a right to be fed up about what is going on right now. So we really need to move on with these elections.
243 days is a long time.
Yes, it is.
So
Why do we need elections now? First of all, the first point is that it is constitutionally due.
Definitely.
And this is it first and foremost. This is not a case that is being fought by the PPP. It is a case that is that is, I would say, it is constitutionally due. The Constitution mandates that elections happen right now.
I think every Guyanese should be fighting for this. It is your
It doesn't
right
affect
to
us or alone,
just
or affect a select few, or affect the PPP or people who like the PPP. It affects everyone.
If they're
because
violating one part of the Constitution, who would stop them from violating any other parts?
Exactly.
Yeah, so basically we have to really wonder, it's about our future also, because if we allow such vulgarity to take place on our constitution now, what happens in the future?
Exactly.
And this is the baseline. We have to understand that we have a right to preserve the things that we have in place right now and build from there. But it is as though right now we're breaking down certain structures and our legal system is being put under significant strain, I would say.
Definitely.
So, I think it was last week, we saw that the PNC, they would have released a press statement speaking about the creation of 1,000 jobs for young people. And, this is one of the reasons why we need these elections, because we would have seen the decimation of 30,000 jobs. 30,000 people have lost their jobs. You're going to make a point.
Importantly, they said that they can provide 1,000 jobs. We have lost 30,000 jobs already. So what are we going to tell the other 29,000 people? And that's very important.
No,
to
but
me.
these are 1,000 young people, so these people that have never had jobs, so the 30,000 still exist.
I think they're just parting off of what the PPP has give a glimpse of their manifesto.
Yes, but specifically, 30,000 people have lost their jobs, Roodi and Nalini. And those families, they're made up of kids, they're made up of young people. So how many of them we can multiply that by 2 or 3.
You see the stories though
household.
of children that are going to school because they can't afford it, people that don't know where their next meal is coming from. You're seeing all these horror stories coming out from these depressed communities where the sugar estates have been closed or all
and of
these
course
things.
these ministers are aloof to this fact because they sit in their offices in Georgetown, they drive around and spend like 5 minutes in these communities where you can't get a grasp of the gravamen of the situation on the ground there.
I think you were telling me something like this is the government that spend the most money in terms of their own expenses on themselves, like they've increased their salaries in how many days?
But here's what this government actually had promised every UG student that within 1 year of graduating, they will get a job.
I
You
recall
remember that
that
promise?
vividly.
No, I think
vividly
Pete
recall
Granger
that promise.
specifically said any university graduate. He didn't
Yes.
specify UG.
Okay, yes, he did say,
Because I
but he did
remember
say
listening to him,
graduation.
be like,
Thank
oh
you,
good, I
thank
can
you.
come home and get a job.
Yes. However, during their years in office, they changed their tune. And I remember the statement I would have made about the plantain chips and the
Cook-up
cook-up
rice.
rice and the cook-up rice. You know, we were not saying that there is not integrity in selling
Yeah.
food or having
Definitely
these small
not.
shop. But how many of us as
Can we all
professionals?
sell it?
That's correct. We have to have a vision in place for our young people, and there's clearly no plan in place, right? And there was never a plan in place, I would say, to tackle youth unemployment in Guyana.
Or unemployment.
That's right. So studies have actually proven that joblessness is linked to crime. And we know that the crime situation in Guyana, and we recall the public security minister, he actually made a statement saying that young people, people in general, they need to be careful when they go in now because basically they're responsible for being robbed. So you know we have...
He plays the media being responsible
Yeah,
as
he
well.
said the media's making it up and the
Oh,
crime has
man.
decreased.
Oh, man.
That's what he said.
So he was basically saying that the media now, they have a role to play in
Protecting people.
Yeah.
Exactly. From getting robbed.
It's basically, I would say that they don't understand exactly, and they're not down to earth. They don't understand what is going on with the average Guyanese person. I don't think. We've also experienced a loss of welfare, a significant loss of welfare. You know, the $10,000 for every child that going back to school. I saw one parent specifically where they were commenting on Facebook and they said that, you know, we're really missing this money that we would have gotten on the PPP. The cash grant helped
Definitely.
us a lot when it comes to expenses for our children. So we've also seen that the university fees, they have escalated, and we've been saying that they've escalated by 35% since this government has taken office. So from the start of their tenure, before they got into office, they're saying that they're going to give jobs and you know they're going to quadruple UG's
Wasn't
budget.
UG free? Supposed to be free
Well,
in 2015,
and they did say that university would be free.
And now
they're
they're coming
saying
back
that
with
again,
that
that-
promise again. That
Oh, man.
if we get all money, you'll get UG free. From nursery all the way to UG will be free for everyone. And all of these
And it was
vague
this government,
promises.
Rudy, who tried to put VAT on private education.
Well, they
They
did.
did put that
Well,
on
well,
private
they did.
education.
Well, they tried to
protest.
succeed, but we as Guyanese, we had to fight for our democratic rights. We had to fight for education.
But they
to be-
put VAT on everything else.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. So I do recall us doing a few protests
Yes.
and you know, and it says that you know you can get results, but you cannot allow a government to go through with their sinister plans. And that is why, you know, we continue to appeal to our Guyanese people to get involved in this fight for our elections. You know, it's important. The government cannot continue to ignore what is right, what is democratically principled according to the Constitution. They have to abide by the rule of law. And this is why it's important for all of us to get involved in this fight, I would say.
Do your bit. Come out and protest with us when we're
Yes.
protesting.
There's also been an increase in cost of living.
Definitely.
I would say with over 200 new tax measures on licenses and fees. 200. So can you imagine what's happening with people's disposable income? The money that you had to spend and go to the market and you know take
Any
your
luxury
kids out.
item or something.
In
Take
fact,
your
there's
kids out.
88 billion more in taxes being collected
Yeah.
by this
And they're
government as
boasting of
compared
that.
to the to last year.
So just so our viewers would understand, that is $88 billion out of your pocket.
Exactly.
Going
That
to
is being
GRA.
going to the GRA. I would say to the
It's the
government.
government
Well,
coffers.
the
To the
government
government.
is their coffers.
The government to spend money on increased travel for their ministers, on their
On their
dietary budget, their entourages, for them to travel and go into this conference and that conference, which is yielding no benefit.
Or
Exactly.
drive around the country with a large parade of vehicles.
Yes, we've seen the
Yeah.
increase in the troops.
Largeness.
In fact, just today I was looking at a document from the Guyana Budget and Policy Institute, where they did a comprehensive report on Budget 2019, and they titled this document "A Disturbing Trend and Vision for Guyana's Future." Now, I'd briefly like to go through just a few things that they highlighted here to
Sure.
touch on the Budget 2019 itself, and one already alluded to some of those statements on the spending of the government and stuff like that. And this is what they said under the heading Social Protection. They said that funding for social protection increased by 7%, which is 1.2 billion, for a total of almost $18.2 billion. roughly 1 billion of new funding for old age pension and social assistance, which increased by 1,000 each for a total of 20,500 and 9,000 respectively. However, funding for child care and protection services have been cut despite a number of rising child abuse cases and the lack of enforcement of current protection regulations. Under the same heading, they went on to say that for the working poor, workers aged 18 to 64 living in poverty, and these directly appeal to the sugar workers and other depressed communities within Ghana, farming communities in particular. We know how hard these people work. There are no poverty reduction programs that provide support to help make ends meet and encourage a path to self-sufficiency. Workers trapped in low-income jobs have no support for upward mobility. Likewise, there are no unemployment support programs of the government. And we know the government compounded these by adding VAT on electricity, VAT on water, which weren't there previously in 2015. Those were measures that they implemented.
Yes, and subsidized for our elders as well.
They took the subsidy out, yeah.
They take the subsidy
but they
out
dropped back to 14% and then throw it on everything.
Yes, and then it, tripled.
Under the economic opportunity headline, more cuts to economic opportunity sector. The government continues to cut overall funding of economic opportunities and in opportunity sectors such as agriculture, natural resources, and commerce. For the fourth consecutive year, Budget 2019 reduced funding from these sectors by 23%, which is equivalent to $6.4 billion for a total of $21 billion. This directly contradicts the government claim of empowering people and building sustainable communities for the good life. We all know they love to tout that,
their
the
budgets
good
are
life for all.
way forward for good life and things like
Exactly.
that, title, right?
However, if you take a comprehensive look at all these budgets, and what they've been doing is they've been cutting funding. And we know currently the rice farmers, you can read it every day in the papers, are facing hardship.
Well,
in fact, they were just outside protesting a few days ago.
This nonsense with bringing a person in that is qualified for paddy bug. We have 3 agronomists in Ghana, 1 at the GRDB. And at this time, there's no point in studying it. It's just you have to spray. You just spray, aerial spray, and that's it. That's all you can do for the people. Don't waste the money on bringing someone in.
And I think this part that I'm about to read will be shocking for most Guyanese if they don't already know or have a feeling of it. These are the numbers to substantiate what the leader of the opposition has been saying over and over again. The government bill is out of control. This is the heading under which they place it. And I quote, "The total cost of running the government is growing at a troubling rate and draining billions of taxpayers' dollars. In 2019, the total cost increased by 28%, 15 billion to $69 billion.
Wow.
That is the largest increase in funding of any service priority, and among that is equivalent to half of all new revenue expended in 2019. Roughly a quarter, 23% of the entire budget is consumed by the government. The cost of running the government is simply out of control. In 2019, the total cost is more than 64%, 27 billion, higher than in 2015. So what we're saying is the government spending 64% more to run the government than they were in 2015. And we knew they had an increase from 2015 compared to the 2014 budget.
Yes.
So all the while, government has just been increasing their spending on themselves. And you mentioned dietary and traveling and all these things.
Not forgetting their own salaries.
And of course, they took massive increase for themselves.
Like what, 2 months after?
Yes, getting into office.
They went on to say, this diverting of resources away from critical services to support an inefficient and ever-growing bureaucracy rob taxpayers of much-needed services and opportunities for long-term prosperity. In 2019, and this is very important, in 2019, it cost taxpayers about $200 million a day or $8 million an hour to keep the government running. And in 2015, the cost was $115 million a day or $5 million an hour. So we have increased by $3 million an hour to run the government in 2019. And what is even more troubling is is despite paying millions more per day to run the government, taxpayer got less and less in returns in terms of job, economic growth,
that's
and quality public services.
You see it all the time.
Exactly. The government is spending more on themselves, and we, the taxpayers, our money is being spent, and we are not
no medicine in public,
getting anywhere or getting efficient services from the government. I'd like to skip briefly over to the deficit, which is the public debt. For those of you who may not know, a budget deficit is a share of the budget financed by borrowing. Of course, when the government spends more than it collects in revenue. So if they're collecting, like I said, $88 billion more, that is still not enough for them to spend, so they've been borrowing as well, and that forms the deficit in public debt. So deficit exploded after 2015 and is growing. The budget deficit exploded after 2015. In 2015, the deficit totaled $1.2 billion, representing less than 1% of the total expenditure. However, in 2019, the deficit rose to $55 billion, equivalent to 18% of total expenditure. The deficit in 2019 is almost 500% of the level in 2015. The heavy utilization of debt post-2015 is essentially early borrowing against the future oil revenue, a risky policy that is a centerpiece of the current administration. And we all know what the government policy is when it comes to the oil sector. They have no idea, they have no clue.
That is their only thing they have, they want. They're like, oh, we're going to be oil and gas, we'll get money then. Let's kill rice, let's kill sugar, kill mining, kill everything else.
So that was a document from the Guyana Budget and Policy Institute. But I also have here with me a report from the Bank of Guyana, half-year report. And in that report, it said, in assessing a country's economy, we must consider Guyana's asset. 6 months after the passage of a no-confidence motion, there has been a decline in $7 billion in the total assets held by the Bank of Guyana, from $220.3 billion in 2018 to $213.2 billion as of June 2019. So we see that the government is rapidly spending all of our money and all of our resources.
That's a decrease of about $7 billion in our assets.
In a few months.
No confidence motion.
Just to give an example from the same Bank of Guyana report as to what the total assets are, I'll just go through one briefly because it's the most shocking, quite frankly, to me. The gold reserves in the Bank of Guyana. In June of 2014, the Guyana gold reserve stood at $16.2 billion. In June of 2015, it was reduced to $15.5 billion. That's when the coalition government would have taken office. They took office in May. So it reduced a bit, but $15.5 billion. In June of 2016, it further reduced to $12.5 billion.
$3 billion.
In June of 2017, it took a dip to $4.6 billion, from 12.5 to 4.6 billion.
Wow.
And that's not even shocking. In June of 2018, it moved from 4.6 billion to $3.1 billion. And currently in June of 2019, it stands at a paltry sum of $589 million.
Wow.
So the government would have spent $15 billion of our gold reserve for being in office for just 5 years. $15 billion.
Not a full 5 years.
And it's not even 5 years.
And what Guyanese have to understand is that the PPP has already said that they will remove all of these hardships,
well, they have every time they've been in government. Guyanese do better on the PPP.
I would say these really ridiculous taxes that is just not necessary, because the government can run more efficiently, and this government lacks strategic vision.
Definitely.
And under the PPP, you will see there will be less spending and more reward and more profits.
I recall the leader of the opposition said he can take the current budget, find money to return the cash grant for the students, find money to give back the pensioners the subsidy to water and electricity, find money for major infrastructure development.
There were all these plans,
because in 1992, when the PPP took office, do you know that they didn't even have vehicles?
Had no money
they didn't have vehicles. They had to catch taxi and they had to walk places, they had to go to buses. This government came to office, They, they found all the money, they got, all the rights, so they're on a spending spree.
Yeah, well, they
And
spent
on
$15
every
billion
year,
from our resorts.
they've
the
taken
$15
taken expenses out.
Yeah.
And, I think it's important for Guyanese to understand that, it is your money that they're spending.
Mhm.
You are
Very
working
important.
hard to contribute your taxes. You're paying your PAY, your NIS. You're paying taxes on every product that you buy virtually. So this is your money that you're basically contributing towards the country. And the way that the government they account for how they're spending, this is your business. You have a right to question how the government is spending your money.
Mm-hmm.
You understand?
And in this period, there has been no accountability whatsoever.
Yeah,
From the
none
passage of the
whatsoever.
no confidence motion to date, there have been no accountability from the government. They've been spending widely. I've just pointed out to you.
Since they've been in government,
billions
though,
of
there's
dollars.
barely any accountability. Most of the procurement is done by the ministers. When
More
there's
so during this period.
Yeah, this period
Busy
has
just
been
spending
like
all the money that they can get their hands
yeah.
on.
I just want to talk just briefly on let's go back to education, because the PPP has already said that they will offer online university for about 20,000 students right off the bat. And this is just one of the things that they're going to be offering under education. So we really have to see that, we're going to really have to put them back in power in order to have in order to have these dreams realized. Because are we going to continue to go to University of Guyana, get this this ridiculous fees and all that?
And on that point note, I'd just like to point out what the WPA said. They had their press conference.
The Five People Party.
Yeah. And they are the ones that have been telling people that, oh, you should vote for the coalition government, you should give them another chance. And rightfully so, the youths have been saying that what assurances can you give to us that the coalition government, as one points out, will give us free education? They have promised it before, they reneged on that promise. Now they're coming again with that promises. And it was, I think, David Hines that says that there is no guarantee that we can make that the coalition government would stick to what they promise. But he's still encouraging young people. He's still
someone
encouraging
that
young
might
people
not do
to
anything
vote
for me.
for the coalition government.
It's important that he is actually acknowledging that this government has failed.
Yes.
He's acknowledged that the government has
Definitely.
failed. A number of people have acknowledged that this government has failed. As a right-thinking, logical Guyanese with a brain, you have to see that if a government fails, they have to leave office. There is no
Well, they
way
have
that
fallen and they're not
they're
even
fallen.
letting
They're
us-
fallen, failed. We have supposed to have had elections, but there's no way that the government fails, does all of this,
miserably.
abuses resources, completely slaps the constitution in its face, and then we're still going to put them back into power. So that statement is actually contradicting. He's contradicting himself in the statement.
On that point where you speak about right thinking, Guyanese, I came across a very interesting letter in the Kaishore News today, and it titled "The Government is Not Illegal." Now, I found this very, very interesting, and I went through the letter at length, and I made a few points, and I'll just read what the author is saying, and then briefly respond, because I know the operator is signaling to us that we have limited time remaining. In this letter, the author writes, others argue that the life of the government will expire on September 18, 2019 if elections are not held before that date, unless the National Assembly votes to grant an extension. Now, this was the contention before, because the understanding of the CCJ's ruling is that from June 18 to September 18, the government is still legal. They were still treating the government as legal. However, with the recent ruling of the Chief Justice, parts of which we read before, and we read paragraphs 178 twice, which says that they ought to have had an elections, and since there was no extension, the government remains illegal as of date. The other part that the author writes, that the notion that the government could be or would be illegal has no basis in the principle and practice of democratic government, the Constitution or law, and no court or parliament has made or supported any such declaration. This is an entirely novel political concept based on fake news and alternative facts. Now, I'd just like to point out to the author of this, someone by the name of Oscar Dolphin, that these are not fake news, sir. What we've seen so far is not fake news. All you've gotten and read about is judgments from the courts, judgment from Guyana's highest court, judgment from the Caribbean, from the Chief Justice herself. As I said, we're going to put this judgment up, the written judgment, so that everyone can see it and read it for yourself, and just don't take our word for it.
Maybe he thinks the court is fictitious.
This notion that he says that the principle of it goes against the principle of a democratic government. We currently don't have a democratic government. The Constitution is clear. It says that in elections within 3 months, that elections has not been held, which means we don't have a democratic government. So your notion is false, with all due respect. He went on to say the president and government were elected directly by the people for a 5-year term, which has not ended or been extended, and election preparation have begun. This is precisely why we keep reiterating the point that this is not
an extraordinary circumstance.
A normal registration election cycle, as the Chief Justice says. Something extraordinary has happened. That is, a no confidence motion was passed on the 21st of December. Certain provisions of the Constitution were activated, and that is why that an elections must be held, and that is why the government is illegal.
I do want to thank Nalini for pointing out before all of those examples in countries that observe democratic principles and observe democratic
and they
laws.
had elections all within 2 months, or some even shorter.
So Guyanese, we have to understand what we're dealing with. Basically, we have to understand our present situation. You have to continue to fight for your rights. You have to continue to demand that your government listens to your voice. You have to demand that the government obeys the Constitution. You're subjected to obey the Constitution. Therefore, the government as well should be subjected to obey the Constitution, which governs our country.
They seem to be reluctant to face reality.
That's correct. So I just want to say we've had a very fruitful discussion this evening. I want to also remind our viewers that you can access the full program on our Facebook page, This Week in 60 Minutes, where you can watch it anytime, any place, and you can probably, give us a share.
Share with your
also,
friends.
Yes, and everyone else.
Yes.
So thank you.
So tonight we covered GCOM did make a decision, so they'll go back and discuss on Friday at 1. You don't need to re-register during the House to House.
Yes.
Very important.
Already registered.
Just say you're already registered. The claims and objections would be the ideal way to go forward, and we do need an election date now.
Yes.
And please remember to pick up your copy of the Mirror, where you will be getting more facts and so on from us. Thank you for having me here.
We have exhausted all of our time. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. We'll be here next week again discussing these very important issues and the recent developments in Guyana. So have a good evening and hope to see you all next week.
See you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
To gear up for the upcoming season at big savings. Your adventure starts here. The world's first 6-function